Hi, today we're looking at photographing wildlife in bad weather. Now, when I was a teenager, I used to read everything I could find on wildlife in the countryside, and there was nowhere near as many books, magazines, television programs, and certainly no internet in those days. So everything I could find was valuable. And in my local newspapers, there was a man called Vivian Bird who used to write about rambling or walks in the countryside. I don't remember whether it was the Birmingham Evening Mail or the Sunday Mercury, but one of the local papers. He also wrote several books as well. And one of his quotes in these articles was, "He who risks the weather seldom gets as wet as the stay-at-homer thinks he will." And that has stuck with me since I was a teenager. And it's something I quite often quote, especially first thing in the morning when I'm looking out the window, it's chucking it down to rain, and I think I should stay in today. And then I say, no, he who risks the weather seldom gets as wet as the stay-at-homer thinks he will. And I try and encourage myself to go out. And photographing wildlife in bad weather has its advantages. It gives an extra element to the picture, it creates atmosphere, and it's lovely to get a bird with raindrops bouncing off its back. So I do it quite frequently, and it's raining today, but I'll still come out to photograph, and we'll just look at some of the pictures I'm going to take today and I've taken in the past. Now, I'm looking a bit dapper today. I've got my new Christmas coat on, waterproof coat, new hat. It'll only last a couple of weeks, it'll be ripped and covered in mud, but we're starting off well. So just a normal feeding station. Got some berries up for very colourful chocolatey box pictures, and then just very simple pictures on sticks. And I like a nice plain darkish background. If you want to show up the rain, you need a darker background. And here we have the Wimberley plamp, which is very, very convenient. We can just put this branch into the end of it, and then we can manipulate that into whatever position we want. Not cheap Wimberley plamps, but very, very useful. You've got to really have at least one in your collection, ideally more than one, because quite often you want a branch above the bird as well. The feeders should be roughly 18 inches away from the branch you want the birds to land on. That's about the right gap for a bird will sit on the branch waiting its turn to come into the feeders. If you've got other birds here and you put the branch too close, they'll be in the same personal space as the birds on the feeders, and they're more likely to squabble. They won't pose well. You want a certain gap between the feeder and the branch where you want the bird to land. And also you want the perches to be in the direction that most of the birds are coming from. So they're coming from that hedgerow across here. Sometimes they come this way, but the bulk of them are coming that direction. So you want your perches on that side of the feeders. Now, I've been inside a dry wooden hide this morning, so there's been no issues with water, but of course modern cameras now are getting very weather resistant. This is the Olympus Micro Four Thirds system. It's not waterproof, and waterproof means you can put it under the water and it won't leak. Well, they will leak under the water, but you can run a hose pipe across the top of them apparently, and they don't leak. They're that well weather sealed. Certainly rain doesn't do them any harm anymore. But say I'm nice and dry inside a hide, so it's not an issue. The only weather conditions I don't like going out in is strong winds, but even that can be an advantage. If you're going somewhere to do birds in flight, if you've got a strong wind blowing from the right direction, it can stall the birds and make them go very slow, makes them much easier to photograph. But on the whole, here in the Midlands, if it's very windy, I don't go out because I haven't got opportunity to do birds in flight around here.
So it wasn't a great session. I didn't have that big a range of birds coming in, really just blue tits and grey tits. I do find that winter feeding stations aren't as effective as they used to be. Don't get the variety of birds coming in and don't get the numbers that we used to get. But these are all taken in slow motion video on the Panasonic G9, so this is 180 frames per second, but you can see with the dark background the rain does show up. The branch is a little bit springy. Perhaps I should have supported it on the left hand side as well. Not only does it make it difficult for me photographically, but the birds actually are struggling to land on it at times and keep their balance, and they're less inclined to land on it. And great tit, and you can see many of the birds are ringed. There is a local ringing group working in the area. Taken at 1/60th of a second. Raindrop just landing on the bird's head and a few streaks. You need to experiment with the shutter speed, go right down to a 20th of a second and hope you get the bird sharp, and go up faster and faster and see what sort of effect you're getting. Nuthatch taken on a different occasion, and long-tailed tit not actually raining but the water droplets on the branch. And kingfishers don't mind the rain, they're used to the water. And I'll just show you a little bit of video. This is some of the first video that I ever took before I really discovered slow motion. But the weather forecast was for heavy rain, so I deliberately set up for the kingfisher in these weather conditions. Spoonbills in a heavy hailstorm, and blue tits in the snow now. The shutter speed in these two pictures is 1/320th of a second. Snow is much easier to work with, it shows up much more than rain does. But again, vary the shutter speed, but you've also got to have a dark background, so you've just got that top left hand corner where you can see it snowing. For years I believed that Lowepro deliberately made their bags grey so you could use them as a grey card for metering, and when I was photographing something in the snow I'd quite often put the camera bag out in the general direction of where I was photographing and use it to meter off. Then they started making the bags black, so whether it was a deliberate policy at one point I don't know, but it's very useful. Getting the exposure right can be a bit tricky in the snow. You've usually got to overexpose. If it's really dull lighting, you're overexposing by about 1.5 stops. This great tip with a relatively fast shutter speed, 1/400th of a second. And a dunnock or hedge sparrow. This great spotted woodpecker was sheltering behind the silver birch because there was quite a gale blowing and it was just trying to keep it out of the wind. The snow was coming down horizontally and I was very glad to be in a solid wooden hide. Goldfinches on teasel. They've been encouraged to come onto the teasel by putting Niger seed into the teasel head, and the same for lesser redpolls. And a flock of lapwings in heavy snow, and then closer up but from the car window, and at least you're very dry and warm when you're inside the car photographing out the window. The shutter speed there is 1/320th of a second, and now it's 1/25th of a second, and you can see it's far more streaky snow. Oyster catcher and red grouse. Now this is a bird that gets photographed in the snow a lot because they can be done from the car window and you can get onto the moorland roads and photograph them relatively easy. That's your typical shutter speed of about 1/400th of a second, and now 1/20th of a second with this streaky snow. And a willow tit. Wasn't actually snowing at the time, but a branch just above the bird suddenly moved and the snowdrops came down. And a crested tit. Blackbird in heavy snow. I think these were taken at the same time as that great spotted woodpecker, so there again the slower shutter speed. It's worth experimenting with the shutter speeds. Magpie in a city park. And try to do birds in flight as well. Red kite and white-tailed eagles. This is in Japan, in Hokkaido. As is this, hooper swans. Japan is a wonderful place for wildlife photography in the winter, and these hooper swans are very tame, very approachable. You can get within a few feet of them. They're like our mute swans in the UK, but the conditions are absolutely fantastic with heavy snow coming down and absolutely bitterly cold. So that's just a handful of pictures to try and encourage you to go out no matter what the weather and take pictures. Thanks for watching.